The very term, Aztec, doesn't pertain to a singular group or tribe of people that dominated Mexico in the 15th century. In fact, the legacy of the Aztecs directly relates to that of the Mexica culture, one of the nomadic Chichimeque people that entered the Valley of Mexico circa 1200 AD. The Mexica were both farmers and hunter-gatherers, but they were mostly known by their contemporaries to be fierce warriors. And these warrior societies were certainly tested by remnants of the Toltec Empire. In fact, according to one version of the Mexica legacy, it was the Toltec warlords who pursued the Mexica and forced them to retreat to an island. And it was on this island that they witnessed the prophecy of an eagle with a snake in its beak, perched on a prickly pear cactus, which led to the founding of the massive city of Tenochtitlan by refugees, circa 1325 AD. Suffice it to say, in these initial years when Tenochtitlan was still considered a backwater settlement, the Mexica were not counted among the political elite of the region. As such, many of them peddled their status as fearsome warriors and inducted themselves as elite mercenaries of the numerous rival Toltec factions. However, as historian John Pohl mentioned in his book Aztec Warrior AD 1325–1521, it was this continued association of the Mexica to military matters that ultimately provided them with the leverage to influence political decisions and even attract royal marriages. This shift in the balance of power in their favor fueled the Mexica to a dominant position in the region. And together banding with their culturally aligned, Nahuatl-speaking brethren from the allied cities of Texcoco and Lacopan, the Mexican nobles and princes formed what is known as the Aztec Triple Alliance or the Aztec Empire. This super entity ruled the area in and around the valley of central Mexico from the 15th century till the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. As we can gather from the earlier entry, the Aztecs pertaining to an alliance of Nahuatl-speaking people were first and foremost one of the famed warrior societies of Mesoamerica. To that end, it doesn't come as a surprise that most adult males had to provide some form of mandatory military service in the Aztec army. In fact, the boys born under the day sign of Madlacli-Cuautli, or Ten Eagle, were compulsorily assigned by revered soothsayers as future warriors of the Aztec military state, irrespective of their statuses as commoners or nobles. Relating to the last part of the statement, while the nobles and high-ranking members of the Aztec society played their crucial roles in both the political and military affairs, the Aztec military structure, at least during the first half of the 15th century, theoretically adhered to the ideals of meritocracy. Simply put, a commoner could also rise up to the rank of an Aztec warrior, on the condition that he proved his ferocity and valor in battle by not only killing but also capturing a certain number of enemies. On occasion, even honorary but non-hereditary noble titles were bestowed upon some of these battle-hardened, commoner, warriors, like Cuaupaypiltan Eagle nobles, and they formed the elite fighting force of the Aztec state. Much like the ancient Spartans, the Aztecs perceived warfare as one of the pillars of their thriving society. And for those chosen as future state warriors, their training started as early as 5 years of age. One of the small boy's first tasks was the intensive physical labor of carrying heavy goods and crucial food supplies from the central marketplace. And for that, he was only provided with a frugal meal of half a maize cake at the age of 3, a full maize cake at the age of 5, and 1½ maize cake at the age of 12. These paltry portions encouraged the would-be Aztec warrior to subsist on meager food items. Such Spartan nutrition patterns were only supplemented by ritual feasts conducted on particular days of the month. By the age of 7, the Aztec boy had to learn to maneuver his family boat and fish on Lake Texcoco. And as expected, idleness was not only frowned upon but actively punished by elders. These punishments ranged from beatings to stinging with agave thorns to even having their faces and eyes incensed with the pernicious smoke from roasted chili peppers. Now we did mention that the Aztec military during the first half of the 15th century theoretically adhered to a merit-based system. However, as referenced in the Aztec Warrior AD 1325–1521 by John Pohl, on the practical side of affairs, the military campaigns were mostly headed by the noble houses, who formed their own religiopolitical institutions. This scope was reflected by the Cameca, or House of the Lineage, a separate school for mostly nobles, where the candidates were trained for both priesthood and warfare. The Telpochcalli, or House of Youth, on the hand, was founded for the commoners mostly. Here they were to be trained as warriors after they crossed the threshold of 15 years, thus being somewhat akin to the ancient Spartan concept of the agoge. Many of these schools were run by veteran warriors who were barely older than the pupils themselves, thus alluding to the demand and progression of military duties in Aztec society. In any case, one of the first tasks assigned to the teenage trainees focused on teamwork, and as such entailed investing their time in repairing and cleaning public works like canals and aqueducts. This notion of societal interdependence was imparted from a very early age in most Aztec boys, which in many ways rather reinforced their sense of fraternity during actual military campaigns. The menial tasks were accompanied by group-based drills that tested their physical fortitude, with the masters often resorting to intimidation and downright abuse to bring the best out of their pupils. Contrary to popular ideas, discipline was one of the mainstays of the Aztec military training, so much so that drunkenness during training could even result in the death penalty on rare occasions. And once again drawing its comparison with the Spartan agoge, the Tepozcatli youths were also encouraged to take up singing and dancing as leisurely activities during evenings. The former was designed to convey spiritual nurturing through the various vibrant Aztec god myths, and the latter was to enhance their agility in the long run. The youths were however introduced to real combat scenarios only during the major religious festivals that were mostly held in the central district of Tenochtitlan. One of these series of ceremonies, held between February and April, was dedicated to the Aztec storm god Tlaloc and the war god Xipe. These festivities inexorably brought forth their versions of vicious ritual combats. Some of the scenarios sort of bridged the gap between bloody gladiatorial contests and melee fighting exhibitions, with high-ranking prisoners of war and captives being forced to defend themselves from heavily armed Aztec opponents, which often resulted in fatalities. At the same time, the veteran masters from both the Cameca and Tepozcatli schools were asked to train their pupils in the art of handling various weapons, starting from slings and bows to spears and clubs. These students were then encouraged to take part in mock battles against each other as teams, with reward systems of food and gifts. These staged combat scenarios were perceived as rites of initiation for the young warriors. As such, the victors were often inducted into advanced training programs that focused on the handling of heavier melee weapons reserved for the elite fighters of the Aztec army. The scope of ritual combat in the Aztec military was not just limited to the ceremonial confines of city temple precincts, but rather extended to actual battlefields. The Xochitlán flower wars or flowery wars mirrored this relentless violence, where religious inclinations fueled the need for warfare. Possibly a practice started by Lacailo, a high-ranking prince who was one of the chief architects of the aforementioned Aztec Triple Alliance, or Aztec Empire. The core doctrine of the flower wars called for blood, as nourishment, for Huitzilopochtli, the Mesoamerican deity of war and sun. In fact, by the early 15th century, Lacailo elevated Huitzilopochtli as the patron god of the very city of Tenochtitlan, thus intrinsically tying up the hunger of gods with the Aztec penchant for ritual war. Interestingly enough, many of these flower wars participated by the young Cameca and Tepozcatli warriors were conducted against the Tlaxcalans, who themselves constituted powerful people with a Nahua cultural affinity shared with the Aztecs. On occasions, the Aztecs reached a status quo agreement with the mighty Tlaxcalans, which outlined that the Xochitlán would be conducted in a bid to capture sacrificial prisoners, as opposed to conquering lands and taking away resources. On the other hand, the status and rank of an Aztec warrior often depended on the number of capable enemies he had captured in battle. In essence, the Flowers' Wars, while maintaining their seemingly vicious religious veneer, pushed the Aztec military into a nigh-perpetual state of warfare. Such ruthless actions, in turn, produced the most fierce, battle-ready warriors who were required by the Aztec Empire to conquer and intimidate the other Mesoamerican city-states in the region. As we fleetingly mentioned before, the Aztec warriors used a range of weapons in combat scenarios, from slings and bows to spears and clubs. But the signature Mesoamerican weapon preferred by some Aztec warriors pertained to the atlatl or spear thrower. Possibly having its origins in the coastal hunting weapons furnished by their predecessors, the atlatl was commonly used by various Mesoamerican cultures like Mixtecs, Zapotecs, and Maya. Suffice it to say, the atlatl as a precise weapon was pretty difficult to master, and as such was possibly used by a few elite Aztec warriors. The macuahudal, roughly translating to hungry wood, on the other hand, was a more direct and brutal, melee weapon, comprising a saw sword differing in sizes from one-handed to two-handed. It was usually carved of hardwood and then embedded with obsidian razor blades secured by bitumen adhesives. On the battlefield, the Nahuatl was also accompanied by a longer halberd-like weapon known as the tepistopoli, and it was probably used by less experienced warriors whose job was to fend off enemy charges from the rear ranks. The aforementioned heavy weapons, like obsidian blades, were complemented with defensive 76 cm diameter shields known as chimeli, made of fire-hardened cane reinforced with heavy cotton or even solid wood sheathed in copper. These relatively large shields were bedecked with intricate featherworks, hanging cloth, leather pieces that doubled as light defenses for the legs and heraldic insignias. To that end, the image of a ferocious Aztec melee fighter with his gruesome Nahuatl and sturdy decorated chimeli is indeed an intimidating one. But, as John Pohl mentioned, the scope was made even more terrifying with the adoption of specialized armor with their variant motifs, all based on the hardy quilted cotton set known as ichcahuapili. As we mentioned before, the status and rank of an Aztec warrior often depended on the number of capable enemies he had captured in battle. And this achieved rank was signified by the uniform-style armor he wore on the battlefield. For example, a Telpuchcali-trained Aztec warrior who had captured 2 captive warriors was entitled to wear the quextecatl, which comprised a conical hat and a tight bodysuit decorated with multicolored feathers like red, blue, and green. A warrior who succeeded in capturing 3 of his foes was gifted with a rather long ichcahuapili with a butterfly-shaped back ornament. The Aztec warrior who captured 4 men was given the famed jaguar suit and helmet, thus making him a jaguar warrior. And the warrior who captured more than 5 captive foes was awarded the lahuisli, or green feather, along with ex-opili, claw, back ornament. It should be noted that the Cameca priests, many of whom were accomplished noble warriors in themselves, were also presented with their rank signifying armor sets. For example, the greatest of these warrior priests, who were relentless and lucky enough to capture 6 or more enemies, were specially awarded coyote uniforms with red or yellow feathers and wooden helmets. Units made famous by the real-time strategy game Age of Empires II, the Eagle Warriors Cuautli and Jaguar Warriors Ocelotl possibly comprised the largest elite warrior band in the Aztec military, and as such when fielded together, were known as the Cuautlasolotl. Pertaining to the former, eagles were revered in Aztec cultures as the symbol of the sun, thus making the Eagle Warriors the warriors of the sun. Suffice it to say, these Aztec fighters draped themselves in eagle feathers and eagle-inspired headgears often made of sturdy wooden helms. And typically, the Eagle Warrior, with obvious, commoner, exceptions, was recruited from the nobility. The Aztec Jaguar Warrior, on the other hand, covered himself in pelts of jaguars and pumas, a practice that not only enhanced his elevated visual impact but also pertained to a ritualistic angle wherein the Aztec warrior believed that he partly imbibed the strength of the predator animal. It can be hypothesized that these elite warriors wore quilted cotton armor ichcahuapili under their animal pelts, while higher-ranking members tended to flaunt their additional apparel in the form of colored feathers and plumes. Now, going by the aforementioned parameter of ranks in the Aztec military, a fighter had to at least capture more than 4 enemies. Some sources mention the figure as 12, while others mention the figure of 20, to be inducted into the order of the Cuautlasolotl, or the rank of eagle. In any case, often placed at the fore of the Aztec war band, members of the Cuautlasolotl were expected to be granted lands and titles by their lords, irrespective of their noble or commoner status, thus in many ways mirroring the early knightly class of medieval Europe. To that end, many modern studies tend to even refer to them as Eagle and Jaguar Knights. Interestingly enough, beyond the order of the Cuautlasolotl, the Aztecs possibly fielded a separate division of their most elite warriors, who were known as the Quachique, or Shorn Ones. Though not much is known about this unique band of Aztec fighters, some sources mention them as being akin to the berserkers, and thus their ranks only included esteemed warriors who had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of warfare, instead of titles and land grants. Simply put, the Quachique possibly comprised full-time soldiers who had proved their flair in battles with courage, ferocity, and downright fanaticism. As for the moniker of Shorn Ones, the elite Aztec warrior probably shaved his entire head with the exception of a long braid over the left ear. One half of this bald patch was painted blue, while the other half was painted red or yellow. Now, according to a few sources, the the Coachique had to take a remorseless oath of not moving backward, in retreat during battles, on the pain of death from their fellow soldiers. And as was the system followed by the Aztec military, the TLA coach Calcatl, roughly a rank equivalent of the chief of armory, usually the second or third most powerful man in the Aztec hierarchy, was an honorary member of the Coachique. Other officers beneath him were known to flaunt their ritzy attires in the form of unusually long wood poles pommidled with feathers and banners fastened to their backs, much like the famed winged hussars of Poland. As author John Pohl mentions in his book Aztec Warrior AD 1325–1521, the Aztecs had the capacity to raise armies that possibly numbered six figures by sheer virtue of their ability to amass both food and resources. Such impressive logistical feats were achieved with the help of innovative land reclamation techniques, chinampa, shallow lake bed agricultural advancements, and storage-based infrastructural facilities that acted as strategic supply depots for the marching armies. In many ways, the large number of troops fielded by the Aztecs provided them with a tactical advantage in campaigns that went beyond obvious numerical superiority. To that end, the Mexica army was often divided into units of 8,000 men known as the Ziquipili. Each of these Ziquipili units probably acted as self-sufficient, mini-armies in themselves who were not only trained to take alternate campaign routes to circumvent enemy positions but were also capable of pinning down their foes until the arrival of larger reinforcements. Pertaining to these battlefield tactics, the Aztec war machine focused on the entrapment of their enemies, as opposed to choosing preferential areas for conducting their military actions. Simply put, the Aztecs favored the use of flexible maneuvers that required a system of signals and communications that could outwit their enemies, thus relegating the need for advantageous terrains and positions. Some of these signals were based on a relay system composed of runners spaced at equal distances from the lines. Other alerting mechanisms were based on smoke and even mirrors, made of polished iron pyrites, that aided in communication over long distances between the Ziquipili units. And once the battle commenced, commanders had to keep an eye on the order of ornamental standards that synchronized with the blaring of conch shells and beats of drums. There were quite a few royal strongholds of Mesoamerican culture centered around the Valley of Mexico. From the 14th century onwards, these strategic settlements also doubled as commercial nerve centers that comprised both trading facilities and craft-producing workshops. Most of the workshops were often contained within the rulers' palatial complexes and supervised by royal women. These craft-producing establishments were known to manufacture exotic goods, like intricate featherworks, and luxury items, like exquisite jewelry, that sort of flowed as currency between the princely classes of the various city-states. To that end, the greater capacity and ability to craft such expensive commodities mirrored the higher statuses extended to many of these royal houses. This resulted in a competitive field encompassing a complex nexus of alliances, gift-sharing, trading, rivalries, and even military raids. The Nahuatl-speaking Aztecs, on the other hand, sought to supplant this volatile economic system with the aid of their martial acumen. In essence, by conquering and taking over, or at least subduing, many of the royal strongholds, the Aztec nobles forced their own commercial road map on the aforementioned craft-producing workshops. Consequently, as opposed to competing with the neighboring city-states, these establishments now produced opulent commodities for their Aztec overlords. These goods, in turn, were circulated among the Aztec princes and warriors, as incentives in the forms of gifts and currencies to raise their appetite for even more military campaigns and conquests. So simply put, the conquests of the Aztecs fueled a noble-dominated, practical cyclic economy of sorts, wherein more territories brought forth the enhanced capacity to produce more luxury items.